All right, so this is part 2 of your neuro lecture. We're going to dive right in. We're first going to be talking about the central nervous system. This is going to be composed of the brain and the spinal cord. Its function is to integrate and respond to the information sent to it by the nerves of the peripheral nervous system. The brain and spinal cord are going to be incredibly important and also incredibly sensitive. So we have several layers that protect them from injury. The first layer is going to be bone. So for the brain, this is going to be our skull. For the spinal cord, this is going to be our vertebrae. We also have what we call meninges, and meninges are membrane layers. The outer layer is going to be called the dura mater. It is a very tough outer layer. Then we have the arachnoid mater. This is going to be the middle layer. It's called arachnoid because it's web-like looking under the microscope. And then we have the pia mater. This is going to be the inner layer that sits directly on the brain or the spinal cord. It is very thin. We are also going to have cerebrospinal fluid. This is going to be a clear liquid that is going to surround the brain and the spinal cord to just provide a little bit more cushion for us. Here is a picture of what this looks like. There's also really great pictures in your book. I just wanted to include this as a study aid for you all. So the purpose of cerebrospinal fluid is to be a shock absorber. It can also help remove waste and provide nutrients to the brain and the spinal cord. CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid, you'll see it abbreviated that way sometimes, is going to be circulated in the arachnoid space of the meninges, moving through the ventricles and the spinal canal. So let's talk a little bit about the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is going to be composed of neuroglial cells. Remember, these are our helper cells. So these are endothelial cells and our astrocytes specifically in this situation that are going to prevent certain substances from diffusing from the bloodstream into the brain. This keeps out harmful substances, but it will let some things move through it because of the way that it's set up. So fats, respiratory gases, alcohol, nicotine, anesthesia drugs, things like this can move across the blood-brain barrier. So about the brain itself. It's going to be made up of both neurons and neuroglial cells. It is going to control our most complex actions. About 25% of all of the calories and oxygen that you take in go to the brain. So it is a huge energy user within our system. It's going to be divided into 4 major parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the diencephalon. Our brain is going to be composed of white matter and gray matter. So we talked about neurons earlier. So you'll want to think about your neurons as we're talking about gray versus white matter. White matter is lighter in color because it is dense collections of those myelinated axon fibers. Whereas the gray matter is darker in color because this is our dendrites, our cell bodies, and the axon terminals that don't have that myelin sheath covering them. I put this table in here for you. It is straight from our book. It is so incredibly helpful for breaking down these different parts of the brain and the very specific tasks that they carry out. So I wanted you to have that study resource, and we're also going to talk more about each one slide by slide. So the cerebrum is going to be the largest part of the brain. It is going to contain 2 cerebral hemispheres, the left and the right. It is responsible for our higher level thinking, our speech, our consciousness, learning, voluntary movement, interpreting our sensory input, and memory storage. The surface of the cerebrum is going to be called the cerebral cortex. It is made up of gray matter, and it's going to be arranged in these folds and fissures. You see a little diagram of these folds and fissures over here. When we're looking at the peaks of these folds, we call those gyrus. And whenever we are looking at the folds that go down, kind of our valleys, that is a sulcus. We use these folds to help us look at brain anatomy and know where certain things are. This part of the brain is going to consist of different lobes, and those lobes are all going to have different purposes. So our frontal lobe up here in blue is going to be for higher cognitive functions, voluntary movement, planning, and motivation. Our occipital lobe in red here in the back is primarily going to deal with vision processing. Our parietal lobe in yellow here in the top middle is going to deal with touch, pain, and pressure. And then our temporal lobe, this is going to sit right behind our ears. This is going to deal with memory, auditory or sound processing, language, and smell. Here's another picture of this. I gave you guys a real brain and then just another labeled out diagram here. I just try to give you guys a lot of resources. Here's more. So this is what we all just went through with the locations highlighted in green, and then a little bit more about their functioning here. So again, this is just another study tool for you all. The corpus callosum is going to be a large tract of white matter, and you can see it highlighted here in green. That is going to connect the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. This is very important for coordinating everything, because these hemispheres are going to interpret sensory information from the opposite side of the body. We call this contralateral, and communicate it through the corpus callosum. So if someone were to have a stroke or other brain injury on the left side of their body, we would see that the right side was the affected side, because the opposite side of the brain is going to control that side of the body. We also have the cerebellum. So the purpose of the cerebellum is to coordinate muscle activity, help us with posture, balance, and our motor skills. And it is this big bit right here at the very back of the brain. Let's talk a little bit about the diencephalon. So this is going to be found deeper in the brain. It can only be seen like in a brain dissection. So we are not seeing this on the surface level of the brain. It is inside. It is going to house the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and also your book talks about the epithalamus. For the sake of this lecture, I'm just going to focus on the thalamus and the hypothalamus, but definitely know that epithalamus stuff that is in your book as well. So it is going to regulate things like feeding, fighting, fleeing, reproducing. It's going to be the body's thermostat, tell us when we're thirsty, tell us when we're hungry, and help us with our sleep and wake cycles. So the thalamus, its purpose is primarily to relay sensory signals from the brainstem to the cerebrum. And the hypothalamus is going to regulate homeostasis by acting as the communication link between the nervous and endocrine systems. The hypothalamus is going to be our connection to the pituitary gland, which we call the master gland of the body, that is going to run almost all of our essential functions. So the brain stem is going to conduct basic autonomic survival behaviors. It relays information between sensory organs, the body, and the higher regions of the brain. It is going to be composed of three main areas. The midbrain, which is going to relay vision. It's going to help with motor control and hearing information. The pons is going to be the relay station of sensory information from the spinal cord to the brain. It also helps with coordination of breathing. The medulla oblongata is going to regulate breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, sneezing, swallowing, and lots of other autonomic functions. Let's talk a little bit about the limbic system. So the limbic system is going to consist of multiple brain structures. Some of them are going to include this limbic load, and this is going to be the gyrus that surrounds the corpus callosum. Its purpose is for emotion processing and behavior regulation. We also have the basal ganglia. It helps us with choosing which actions to perform and responding to stimuli. The hippocampus is going to deal with learning, short-term memory processing, and long-term memory storage. The hypothalamus, again, we already talked about, has so many essential functions, but it is also going to be a helper in that learning, memory processing, and long-term memory storage. The amygdala deals with the emotional, sexual, and social behaviors. So this is going to be like our fight or flight and deal with aggression and fear. And then the thalamus, again, is going to deal with those same sorts of things and all of the things that we listed out earlier. So the limbic system, overall is the part of the brain, or the parts of the brain, that are going to be involved in emotions, memory formation, learning, motivation, and behavior regulation. Here's a mnemonic to help you remember this. Damage or dysfunction in the limbic system can be associated with disorders such as schizophrenia, PTSD, OCD, depression, ADHD, all kinds of things. So let's talk a little bit about the spinal cord. This is going to be the extension of the brainstem that is going to be protected by the vertebrae of the spine. Its purpose is to conduct signals between the brain and the body and to control certain reflexes. The peripheral nervous system is what we're going to talk about next. It's going to consist of the nerves and ganglia that branch off from the central nervous system. It includes 12 cranial nerve pairs and 31 spinal nerve pairs. All of the nerve branches throughout the body. There's thousands of them. So this is going to be broken into two primary sections: the somatic nervous system, which is going to be voluntary. These are going to be like our skeletal muscles and our special senses, and we'll talk more about senses in the next unit. It is going to be composed of sensory neurons. And we already talked about how these are afferent, and it's going to be composed of motor neurons, or those efferent neurons that help us, pull back an arm or a leg or whatever it is that we are trying to do with those voluntary muscles. We also have the autonomic nervous system. This is our involuntary nervous system. This deals with our smooth and our cardiac muscles, our glands, all of those kinds of things that our body just does but is not within our conscious control. There's going to be two parts of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system deals with action and activity. So this is our fight or flight. Whenever we are in a situation and we have to make a quick decision, like stressful situations, this is where the sympathetic nervous system is doing that work. Our parasympathetic nervous system is frequently referred to as the rest and digest nervous system. This helps us with housekeeping functions, like digesting food, right? This handles everything that our body needs to do to get nutrients and things like that. I put another diagram here to kind of show the whole entire breakdown of this. You see, you have your central nervous system up here, your peripheral nervous system, which is then broken down into sensory and motor, and then your motor is then broken down into your somatic nervous system and your autonomic, and then your autonomic is broken down into your sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. So I hope seeing that little schematic kind of helps with your studying just a little bit. This is the same kind of thing, just broken down in a different way. And then here is a diagram that shows some of the ways. There are many more than this, but here's some of the ways that the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions help us to maintain homeostasis. Like you can see that our parasympathetic system constricts our pupils, it slows our heart rate, whereas you're seeing the opposite over here, right? Slow heart rate, increased heart rate. Our parasympathetic is going to constrict our airways, whereas the sympathetic is going to open up those airways in case we need to run or flee from danger. Our parasympathetic is going to stimulate our digestive activity, whereas our sympathetic is going to inhibit that activity, because whenever you need energy to be in this fight or flight response, you don't want to waste any energy on things like digesting that you can do later. Our sympathetic is also going to stimulate glucose release. Remember, glucose is our source of energy in the body. And if we are responding to a threat, we need a lot of that glucose. We also need a lot of adrenaline to make that work. So there is a little breakdown of that. And then here is a breakdown of how these nerves actually are mapped out in relation to the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, and which of those nerves is going to innervate these different things to make that work. I just put this in here as a study tool for you all. You don't need to feel like you need to memorize this or anything. I just wanted to give you a few different ways to look at this information in case it wasn't being absorbed one way or the other. That is all that I have for this lecture. If you have any questions about this, please reach out. This lecture felt really quick. So yeah, let me know if you're having a hard time and we will get it fixed. Thanks.